different channels, gets plugged in, gets going, all of that. But welcome. How are you?
Doing well today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Good. I'm glad you're here. I'm excited about this conversation.
This is so fun to loop back around with you after, growing with you in college and through our professional careers.
I know, so many years, so many twists and turns in our different careers, and keep crossing paths somehow, some way, right?
Yeah, this is so fun.
I love it. It's really beautiful. Awesome. Let's see. We've been live for a few seconds. That should have given all the technology pieces a chance to do what they do. Let's see here. Got one last thing to check. Give folks a chance to kind of tune in if needed. I'm going to check this out real quick. All right. And last little button. All right. I think it's all working.
Right.
Technology's half the battle, isn't it?
Always.
Last time around, we just couldn't figure out. There was, I don't know. It told us what button to push. We kept pushing it. Nothing was happening. Could not figure out why, but eventually got there. So it was all good.
Yeah, here we are.
All right. Well, let's dive in. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Perfect. Well, go ahead and let's just start with the absolute basics. Like, give us your one-line description of who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Yeah. So I'm Jenna Mobley of Tending Our Common Ground, and we provide teachers with the tools that they need to both implement food access and food education programs and to teach the academic standards and the social justice standards through the context of food.
I love it. I love it. And I'm excited that you're our second guest on this series because I think that you have such an interesting specialty that some people might not know is an option and that some people might not realize is such an access point for closing equity gaps in schools. And that's the part of your work that gets me really, really excited. So can you talk a little bit about like the social justice connection in the work that you do and what gets you excited about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's sort of two components to that. One is that when I was a second grade teacher, I was doing my best to teach all these academic standards in a context that would reach all of my kids, that every single one of my kids would get excited about, that they would have background experience in. And I sort of stumbled onto food. And it just turned out that food was this one thing that every single one of my kids got excited about. All of them had connections to food, like through their families. Everyone eats every single day.
Right.
And we could all experience these lessons together. You didn't have to have a garden at home. We were all going to dig in the dirt together. We all had access to that experience together. It didn't matter what sort of like kitchen you had at home because we were all going to cook together and experience that with all of our senses. So it just turned into a way for me to teach the academic standards where every single one of my kids could access that and experience it all together.
Yes.
It felt really special to my kids. And it became more about social justice and action when I also realized that a lot of my kids, through this work and through hearing about their experiences with food, I realized that a lot of my kids were dealing with food insecurity and they didn't have food access in their homes and in their neighborhoods. They were coming to my class and hungry and not ready to learn. And so it became a lot more about that justice and action piece to make sure that our neighborhoods were equipped with what we needed, with the access to affordable and nutritious food so the kids could come ready to learn and so they could build a positive, nurturing relationship with food culturally and with the nutritional value of it. So it sort of morphed into something even bigger and broader than just trying to teach the academic standards.
Yes. And it's one of those moments where we can see the potential of schools to actually be a leveling the playing field place, right? Because we can't control what is going on in our students' home lives and the obstacles they face and the access that they have as much as we want to and as much as that kills us as teachers, right? But at school, you can provide those access points and cooking together and the education around food and what a cool way to use that. And I was just thinking too about just knowing a little bit, I personally know a little of your background and what might have led you into this aspect around food and gardens. And can you take us back a little bit and just walk us from, you mentioned your classroom and what got you interested in the food side there, But what about in your own background and how you've merged some of your interests and some of your history and some of your training into this one awesome program that you're leading now?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was growing up, my parents were divorced, and I spent some of the time at my mom's house and some at my dad's house. And each of those families, and each of those homes, and each of those cities ended up having a very specific feeling to me and a connection to me. And I realized that a lot of that had to do with food. And that at my mom's house, we had these certain dishes that we had all the time that we gathered around and we celebrated around. And that became a big part of how we connected with each other and what our memories were around. And at my dad's house, we were living a lot closer to the land and an intentional community where we were growing a lot of our food and being real connected to where that food came from. And I think that combination of both of those, while at the time I didn't realize the impact it had on me, and I would say even through college and sort of getting started on my career, I didn't realize that impact that those experiences growing up were really having. But when I sort of stumbled into this, and maybe 2010, something like that, it started to really feel like home. And it was a way for me to connect more deeply with myself and my roots and my food traditions, and share with kids like these really incredible experiences that I got to have when I was a kid of watching a seed grow and being able to harvest something out of the ground and feeling that connection to the earth, and being able to then give that experience to some other kids felt really special. You know?
Yes. Yeah. And I think as I get older, like one of the beautiful things about aging is having those reflective moments and realizing, wait, I am now who I've always been. And now I'm just able to reflect on it in this different way and have the power to do something with it in this different way. So I love that part of your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you've got these different areas of expertise. You've got the environmental science piece. You've got school gardens in particular, which I want to get into a little bit later, food access, social justice. Can you tell us a little more about just kind of on a broad level, like if I'm not a teacher, how do those pieces intersect in our society, and like how do we see those showing up in schools?
Yeah, absolutely. So these were all areas that I've been interested in different ways and in different contexts. And when I started teaching about food while I was a teacher, like I mentioned earlier, it became a way to teach about the academic standards. Then I also realized that our food was a way to talk about social justice and what was going on in our neighborhood.
Yes.
That the choices that we made around food also impacted the environment around us. The choices we make around food, and especially growing local food, has a huge impact on the environment around us. So it is sort of like as I was progressing through my career, all of these different things I was interested in all came back to food as just a context for the way that we can make a big impact in our environment and stay connected to the land, how we can make a big impact socially in our neighborhoods and connect with each other and that diversity of our neighborhoods and celebrate food together, and how we can really connect to ourselves and nurture our own bodies and understand what we need, and how our identities are wrapped up in food too. Food just sort of became this hub where the choices that we make around food and the way that food interacts in our lives happens to hit all of these areas between our personal development, our community development, and this environmental part as well.
Right, right. And I hope that as people are watching and kind of listening to you explain those different pieces, some light bulbs are going off and some ahas of like, oh, like one on the most basic shallow level, we all love when we're at a training, there's food there. Like we can't lie, like food makes everything better. Every meeting's better when there's food. And then as you start unpacking it, there's all these layers of depth to it that have to do with our identities, that have to do with fixing problems that are going on in our society, that have to do with breaking patterns and habits with the learning we're doing in school that they can take with them out into the world. So thanks for talking us through that.
Yeah, of course. It is sort of an interesting niche to fall into, but it really is an intersection in so many ways from our school walls to beyond in our communities.
Totally. It totally is. And then, you know, I know that as teachers are watching, we all love when it's practical. Give it to me practical. So we've talked about it on a high level. We've talked about the meaning behind it, but what's something that a teacher could do tomorrow if they want to start dabbling in this line of work that you're a specialist in?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe a starting place would be doing a taste test, like a mindful, sensory, hands-on taste test. And this time of year, maybe carrots is a good thing to do. You know, we're coming out of the cool season, so there's a lot of carrots on our menu. And so maybe what you would start with is doing a read aloud of some books about carrots, some informational books with a lot of facts in them and learning about carrots, but also some narrative books. There's some great ones, and I could provide a list later of all of my favorites.
I'd love that.
That's such a fun way to have a deeper reason to want to read these texts, is you're about to eat these carrots. Let's see what we can learn about them first. And then you could do a math lesson, depending on what grade you are teaching. It could be a lesson on how much the carrots cost. You could do a lesson on how to divide those carrots equally between students. I have never seen my second graders as interested in informal division strategies as when I gave them a bunch of carrots and said, figure out how to divide these equally.
Yes.
That is like the best motivation for accurate division. And then you could talk about like what part of the plant a carrot is. That's another one of our second grade standards. Of course, this could be at any grade level, but I'm going to choose second grade as our example. And what part of the plant we eat. So maybe we would see the stems and the leaves. The part we eat is the root. We could talk about the structure and the function, some of those NGSS standards of what function did that root play for the carrot. That's where it stored all of its energy underground. So what do we get? What function does it play for us when we eat it? Yes. We also get that energy. We could talk about nutrition concepts, of course. We could talk about our go, grow, and glow foods. That's a deeper lesson, but carrots are some of our glow foods and how that nourishes our body. We could talk about eat the rainbow concepts and what different vitamins and minerals we get from carrots. You could also, while you're eating a carrot or any food out of the school cafeteria, you could imagine how that food got to your plate. So that gets to some of those social studies and economic understandings of who were all the workers along the way that had something to do with the way that this food got to your plate. And even if you don't know, which we often don't, if we're in a school cafeteria, we can imagine how many people had something to do with that food getting to your plate. And when you're in older grades, thinking about the choices you can make on where you get your food and how the people involved are impacted in that way. We could talk about the geographic understandings. Like, again, these are all just prompts. You don't need any materials, anything like that. This is just, if you have a bunch of carrots with your kids, these are all things you can just explore and talk about.
Right.
With geographic understandings, you could talk about how carrots are eaten around the world, or how carrots are eaten just in the classroom, like how each of them have eaten carrots before, how they like to eat carrots and how they don't love to eat carrots, all the different dishes that they've tried before. After tasting the carrots, you could develop a list of adjectives, of all the tasting adjectives and the texture adjectives, make a word bank. You could turn those into acrostic poems, or if you're studying syllables, you could turn them into haikus. You could also make a bar graph of the students' opinions of carrots, how many kids liked it, loved it, and didn't care for it yet. You could also study that in fractions or percentages with your older kids. You know, there are just so many different ways that, like, if you just have some carrots or some strawberries or some apples, and maybe it's just the apples or carrots or strawberries that are provided for your school lunch or in your school cafeteria, if you just have something like that, there are ways to just already engage kids in all of these different academic and community understandings just by thinking about this carrot in a lot of different ways. Beyond, like, I'm going to eat this because I'm hungry and then I'm going to be full, right? It can be a lot deeper than that. And some of those prompts can sort of get a teacher started on having those conversations with kids and give sort of a building place to jump off of. And then maybe plant the carrots and go to a farmer's market.
Go deeper with it after that.
But something like that could really be a jumping off point for the types of conversations.
Right. I'm just so blown away that just off the top of your head, you just gave us activities for English language arts, reading, math, social studies, science, all based on carrots as the inspiration. Like, boom, got them all out there. That is awesome.
Yeah, that's what we do.
And I know that you do that work for schools, right? Like what you just gave to us is, you know, all these ideas off the top of your head, but you do this on a more formal way as well. You go into schools, you provide trainings, you provide coaching, workshops. What are some of the packages a school might book from you to work with you in this way?
Yeah, so there's three main services I offer. One is a training, and we can talk a little bit more about what that training looks like. Typically, that is for a full school or for a district, and those can be anywhere from 1 hour to multiple days of training. We can talk more about those in a minute. I also offer model lessons. This has been a really great model for some of the schools in my neighborhood, where I come in and I model how to teach some of these lessons, maybe outside in the garden, while all the other grade level teachers watch me teach that lesson, and then they are challenged to go teach that lesson with their kids. Usually it happens during their planning period, during the specials rotation, so they have that time off, and that's been a really fun model to try. Is they watch me do it, and then they go give it a try themselves. And the third service that I offer is coaching. And coaching can be either done in person or virtually. Right now, I have a lot of teachers virtually all over the country, or actually the world right now, where they'll send me a video of them teaching for about 30 minutes, one of their hands-on cooking or gardening classes. And then we jump on a call and we talk through what went well and what they want to do better next time and set some goals for them. And that has been really effective for some of these individual teachers that are hoping to learn and grow in this type of work.
I love it. I love it. And I'm jumping around here a little bit, but I know we touched earlier on school garden programs specifically, and I'd love to just revisit that because I know that's also some work that you have done and could do with schools as well. Is that correct?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
talk to me about the garden program that you were part of establishing at a school here in Atlanta and what you've done since then with helping schools develop school garden and school garden programming.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was a second grade teacher at Springdale Park Elementary School, we built up a school garden program and did a lot of trial and error there. And that is a lot of how I've gotten to where I am today, is that as a second grade teacher and then a first grade teacher, I was trying these lessons as we were building this garden year after year after year and just figuring out what works, not just for a good garden and a productive garden, but in an educational space. To shift that mindset from this is an experimental educational garden. It might not be the most productive, but most importantly, the kids are engaged in it and they are running experiments all the time. And so that was sort of a shift that I was able to lean towards while I was getting into this part of my career. And then I got to be a specialist teacher for a couple of years. And that was really neat because I got to teach every single class on every single grade level every single week. And so for each of these lessons that developed, I got to try the lesson out in the school garden while we're building the school garden. I got to try it out 5 or 6 times with every single class and really got to hone in on not only how to teach in the garden, but what that garden space needed to be a great place for kids to learn as the goal, as the main goal, a place for kids to learn and engage and feel comfortable and feel like they could explore and go on scavenger hunts. So it really was this long process. And now I really enjoy going to schools all over the place or visiting them virtually as well to see their space and what their infrastructure looks like, what they're working with, and trying to create a solution for them where it can be very easy. It can we can reduce a lot of the maintenance. We can work with what is native in their area to make it as hands-off as possible so that the maintenance doesn't become overwhelming, but the kids will still have a lot to enjoy and a lot of different sensory plants that are hardy. You can't kill them. There's just these plants that you can eat and you can smell and you can touch and have all these different textures. And building that space beyond just the plants that we'll choose for a school garden, but building the entire space where there's room for whole group gathering and small group work and pathways appropriate for exploring and whatever else we need out there, whether it's clipboards or wagons, building that space so that it is perfect for kids to get out there and really engage with. It's been a lot of fun working with these schools, and each school is different and unique, but finding a way that works for them to have that space available to their teachers and kids.
Yeah, and it sounds like your early experiences with having to be an experimenter and have an entrepreneurial mindset, a scientific mindset to try out, like, does this work? Does this not? Not only were you doing that in yourself, in your own work around the space and the program, but also encouraging that in students and like, oh, the garden is a place where we can come to do this experimenting. So I think that it sounds like that's a lot of the foundation, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And then, you know, like when you're coming into a school and helping them establish a program, it's I can't think of a less one size fits all than garden, right? Like we have to take into account like the space, the conditions, the climate, the
Yeah.
everything, the resources available. So it sounds like going in and doing kind of some pre-assessment work alongside the school team is a big important part of what you do.
For sure. And to add on to what you listed there, I think each school has a different goal for the garden
Sure.
and how they're going to use it and who's going to be involved in it. So I think beyond just the climate and the actual physical conditions, going into a school early and surveying the kids, the parents, all of the faculty and staff, the community supporters that are interested in either giving in-kind donations or sponsorship or coming and doing Wednesday weeders or being involved,
Right.
but hearing all of those folks about how they want to use that garden space, what that garden space is going to mean to them, how they want to maintain it, what they want it to look like. Like that is one of those really important first steps to make sure that we have that ground up sort of community buy-in, and that garden represents that specific community and its needs and wants and desires.
That's right. That's right. Reflecting the community, involving the community, all of the above. So when you are working with a school team and helping them establish their program or helping bring in some of your training services, how do you go about helping get folks on board who might be resistant? Because we all know a teacher's job is so busy. We've been there. You and I have personally been there. We see it play out all the time. And how do you help gain buy-in from teachers who might feel overwhelmed and help them understand this isn't just like one more thing on your plate, so to speak?
Absolutely. This is my self-proclaimed superpower.
Yes.
What I'm most proud of and what I love to work on specifically is how to make this work for teachers.
Yes.
And one of the most important messages is that this is not something extra to add on or extra to do. You don't need to find more time in your day to do it, but instead it is the way that you now can teach about bar graphs, right, or that you can now learn about syllables, or that you can now explore plant parts.
Like you have to teach those things anyway. Here's this more hands-on way to do it that you might even have more fun with yourself doing, right?
Yeah, like you just take a lot of those same lessons and a lot of the same way that you manage your class and build classroom community, and just take that outside where we have the opportunity to engage with our senses more and have that hands-on experiential learning, in to replace some of the lessons that would have happened inside, right? So it's there are ways to find lots of connections to the academic standards, and then to use those as the way that you teach concepts like bar graphs, for example.
Right.
But it is tricky, and I have been a public school teacher for a very long time, so I know that it's tricky and can speak from that experience. And then there's also a lot of things that the administration can do to set teachers up for success in this way. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot we can do about the physical space to set teachers up for success. Just like quick examples would be like having a wagon with clipboards and sharpened pencils every single day ready outside the garden door, because we know that's what teachers need to teach and learn with their kids out in the garden.
Those simple things, they make such a difference. Those simple things.
Right. Little things.
Right.
Having a garden library of books that the teachers can just pull books that are connected, that are on their grade level. It could be like having seating for all 28 kids out in the school garden. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see, is there's not enough seating in the school garden for all 28 to sit in a circle. And so that makes it harder for teachers to teach. So if we can build in some of those physical elements that make it easier for teachers to teach the way that they would inside, but just outside, and then make those standards connections where they see how valuable it is to teach those standards in a brand new hands-on way. Those are two of the biggest ways that we can gain that buy-in and encourage teachers to give it a try.
Right.
One of my favorite quotes is that you don't need a green thumb, you just need dirty knees. And it's kind of that idea, like, we just want to get them out there to try.
Yes.
We just want to get them out there to do this experiment with us. They don't have to be an expert, but to provide them with what they need to be curious with the kids and do the experiments with the kids.
I love that. I love that. And when you look back at some of the work you've done and having to overcome some of those obstacles together, what makes you feel really proud? Like, is there a story you can remember about working with teachers or working with schools that makes you feel really proud?
You know, the moments that I think of the most right now are really of my students, because I've been in this for 14 years now, teaching in the same school and working in the same district. And a lot of these students have grown up from kindergarten all the way through 5th grade as part of this garden program. And now, like just the other day, I was over at Ace Hardware, and one of my students is now 22 years old, working at Ace Hardware. His name is Mac, and I just cried when I saw him. And he said that he was working there because he loved being outside and he loved being in the garden. And one day he to be like a landscape designer, and he was telling me about going to the farmer's market down the street, and he was cooking for his mom. And those lessons stuck with him. And that is the most fulfilling and impactful part of my work. And to think that when I'm training all of these teachers and all of these schools, all of the kids they're going to reach with this type of meaningful education that's really going to stick with them more than anything that they could work on in a worksheet or in a book. These are experiences that they remember the rest of their lives, and just trying to multiply those numbers in my head of how many kids all of these teachers could reach is just like more than my brain can possibly imagine. And it's just, it's so fulfilling to think that they might run into kids like Mac one day that have grown up and still remember those experiences.
And that is the exciting part about training as a field and professional development as a field is I miss the kids all the time. I miss them dearly. But when I think about the impact, the opportunity to work alongside teachers who are then having that impact with more kids, that's like, okay, I might be a little farther removed than I love to be, but these teachers that are on the front lines are doing this amazing work and the impact's going further. So I love that.
Yeah, it's so special. We have the best job in the world.
Oh, yes. So I was thinking more about your training sessions, and you said you do the coaching work, sometimes the school garden work, but obviously through the examples you've given, your work goes beyond just a physical space or creating the garden. You can also teach teachers how to do food-based education, teaching standards through all of these different experiences with growing and cooking food. So it sounds like there's just different ways and at different levels that a school can engage with you, from the smallest little way to the most full-on way. Are there other workshops you haven't mentioned yet? I know that there was one that I got to sit in that you led before around making mealtime meaningful. And I know I'm familiar with another one you do around school lunches and like using those as a teaching jumping off point. Are there other workshops you haven't mentioned that a school might book that are things like that, like a workshop package?
Oh, there are so many. And a lot of the common ones have to do with either school gardens, hands-on cooking, doing taste tests. Like you mentioned, a lot of that work happens in the school cafeteria because school cafeteria programs are where the food is.
Great, the food's already there.
Right. Often where the funding is also.
Okay.
Cafeterias and also school gardens are a lot of the places where we'll do project-based learning around some of these environmental impact projects.
Yes.
So right now I'm helping a whole school district up in North Georgia implement what we're calling the Food Warriors Project, which is reducing and eliminating the waste out of their school cafeteria and getting compost to go take out into the garden and feed their garden. So really anything a school can dream up, whatever they would like to work on with their kids around environmental practices, these social justice projects, or teaching a specific academic standards, and wherever a school is, whether or not they have a school garden ready, whether or not they're proud of their cafeteria program.
Right, meet them where they are.
All places. Yeah, and every training is totally different based on what resources the school does have and what their specific interest and focus is. Right. We can find a program that will work great for them.
Yeah. And I love that about your work, the way it's so customizable. You know, it can be molded to fit exactly where a school is, exactly what they need. So it's really awesome. Now, my next question is actually from someone who wrote in that is a school leader and was curious about something with your work. I want to read it so that I get it right. What have been your most important lessons learned as you've pursued your passions? And I just thought that was such a beautifully worded question.
Yeah. You know, the first thing that comes to mind for me is that a big focus of my work over the years and of all teachers' work is building a classroom community and creating a space where all students can thrive and work together and express themselves individually and respect each other and their differences. And one of the biggest things that stands out to me is that when I was earlier in my career, what that looked like for me was a lot of expectation settings and holding students and being consistent and holding them to those expectations. And it was a very tight and rigid way of building a community. You know, I thought, if I was to sum it up early in my career, I thought that my job was to set a clear expectation and consistently hold students to that expectation. And now, after many, many years, my approach to classroom community is very different. And it is much more student-centered, where the students in the garden or in the classroom develop their own community agreements and agree to them together. We all hold each other accountable to what we've all agreed on together. There's a lot more, even just academically and structurally, a lot more opportunity for students to explore and follow a path of curiosity rather than this rigid time-stamped lesson plans. That has really been one of the biggest and deepest things that I've learned through doing this work, is the importance of centering that student, those students, all of them, first and foremost, and building that community, whether you're building it in the classroom, at the garden, at the school cafeteria table, building it in a way that reflects them, that they have created. And just as a teacher, I'm just a facilitator. I just sit back as a member in the circle with everyone else, generating these ideas, where I spent many of my first years teaching being the one standing up in front when everyone's looking at me, because I have the knowledge and I'm going to give you all of the information. You know, it's really shifted. That's one of the biggest shifts that I've learned through doing a lot of teaching and a lot of professional development.
Yes.
And I feel just so strongly about the way that we are now building that classroom community through these activities.
Right. So much of that is so relatable. One, because you and I were in the same teacher prep program, and we're probably in the same position of standing at the front and you know, playing teacher in our early days. And then you're right. I mean, some of those lessons you can only learn with time, right? With those years and getting your reps in. That's one of my favorite sayings someone taught me, getting your reps in. And you know, like, there's nothing wrong with having clear expectations and having clear processes to follow. Those are all beautiful things. But if it's not rooted in relationship and moving towards a place of knowing one another more deeply and being in community with kids, it's not going to work. Right. So they have to go hand in hand. So I love it. That's a great place for us to start wrapping up even. That's such a great takeaway. And I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just was going to place that back in the garden, that like a lot of those ideas really come out in the school garden setting, where kids can be themselves and express themselves and engage and be curious. That happens to be a great place to see all of those relationships build and to let kids follow their curiosity and get to know themselves and each other.
Right. There's something magical about being outside or changing the setting just a little bit or changing the flow just a little bit that gives kids space to be a little more themselves, right? And how beautiful to be able to do that through your work. Well, is there anything we didn't cover today that you really hope folks take away with them as we're closing out?
No, I don't think so. I've really enjoyed talking to you and being able to share about all of this that I'm so passionate about. And I hope folks reach out to see what this might look like in their schools. I know every school is so different and at a very different starting point, and has different layers and layers of barriers. But that is the superpower. I would encourage anyone to reach out, and we can talk about all of the creative solutions to make your vision come true for whatever sort of programming you're hoping to do at your school.
Yeah, superpower is the right word. I can vouch for your skill in that way, and really being genuinely committed to meeting folks where they are is something I really admire about you professionally. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. I know on my end at Co-CreatED, this video is going to be available. I'll be putting it on your company profile, which is on the Co-CreatED platform. Also on Co-CreatED, I know that you've got a couple free resources in our free resource library that you've created that teachers can download for free if they want to try it out. Where else can folks connect with you? Obviously through Co-CreatED, and where else can they continue following you or reach out if they want more information?
Yeah, so you can visit my website, tendingourcommonground.com, to get in touch with me, or email me at tendingourcommonground@gmail.com. I also keep my Instagram, which is also Tending Our Common Ground, pretty updated with a lot of resources for teachers. Right now I'm working on a series of favorite children's books, both information and narrative, about a lot of different seasonal foods as they come out. And I talk about for each of the book reviews what the different academic standards are that are related to that food and to that book. So you can check it out there.
Great. Well, thank you for all the resources you've shared and for the awesome work you're doing out there making an impact. And I hope folks do reach out to you. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody.